First, I'd like to say, a genuine, sincere thank you for having me. And you know what? I was supposed to do this talk last year, and my mom got really sick, and she had recently a stroke. And so I am even more aware, I think, now of some of the realities and the experiences of people working through and living with stroke and brain injury. Um, Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I am indeed a professor of psychology, but I specialize in environmental psychology. And if you haven't heard about what that is, I'll explain it. Maybe in a more of an academic way, but you can follow along in the slides and of course ask me any questions at the end. Let me just see if this works. Yeah, the other thing I am is really involved in the Canadian Psychological Association. And I like to throw that out there because it gives a lot of resources, free resources to the public about psychology, any kind of psychology you're interested in, not just environmental, but, developmental, cognitive, neuro, social, clinical, anything you can think of that's related to mental life and behavior. The Canadian Psychological Association probably has a resource for you. And I'm very happy to be a fellow of that organization. So I'll say that, and also say that I'm happily the co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Environmental Psychology, which is arguably the leading journal in our field. And I co-edit that with Dr. Wes Schultz, who's down in California. And so again, if anything I say today is really, you're keen on learning more, there are always open access articles in that journal that if you go to the library, there's going to be access for you there, or just at home on the internet. If you want to look through that journal, you can certainly read all about other topics in environmental psych. So as was said, this talks about environmental psychology in general. It's about this concept, sense of place, which I'll explain what that is in a little bit more detail in a minute. And then some things about the benefits of nature, but it's just the highlights. There's so much more academic and practical research going on behind the scenes. So everything I say, just imagine there's, papers and papers of literature and research behind all of these concepts that you're free to explore on your own time. So if we think about what environmental psych is, and I'm just going to move my little screen here if I can, so I can see my own slides a bit better. If you think about what environmental psychology is, and again, you may not have heard about it because it's not always taught in like an introduction to psychology course in university or in college or in high school. But what it is a smaller, relatively young subfield of psychology. It's been around formally for about 70 years. And what we do isn't the same as what a clinician does or what a social psychologist does or developmental psychologist does. What we do is think about the transactions between people and the places that they live in, that they work in, that they play in, and basically spend their time in. And that definition is actually quite broad because there's a couple things in that you might be thinking, wow, that's a big definition. Like place, that could mean anything. And the answer is yes, we actually do study everywhere because the philosophy is that no matter where you are, the environment around you is going to stimulate you. It's going to affect your mood. It's going to affect your attitudes, your behaviors, your choices, and who you are, your quality of life, right? So the study of people-place relationships is a transactional thing because the environment affects us, the lighting, the sound, the smells, how hot or cold we are, the meaning of things that we see around us. They all affect us as people, but we also affect the environment around us too. And so an environmental psychologist will study all of those different relationships between people and place and how place affects us as human beings and how human beings affect place. And it could be, when I say physical settings, if you think, oh, that's a very big, broad thing to say. And it's true. I mean, I've studied hospitals and airports and libraries and schools and recreation centers and coffee shops and parks and provincial parks, not just local parks. You can take it at all these different scales and do research on how people use different places in their lives. And that's really important, especially when it merges into public health and healthcare, because you could study the hospital room or the ways in which your home changes when you come home living a different sort of life than you did pre or post an accident, say, or a brain injury or something. you have to sort of study the ways in which your environment changes based on who you are and what your identity is and what your behaviors are and what your abilities are. So we often find ourselves working a lot with architects and engineers and administrators for public infrastructure, just because it's good to have the design of things plus the psychology of things all helping to answer questions for people to live a quality life. So the aim, I guess, is to improve human relations with natural settings. So a lot of environmental psychologists will work with environmental studies folks, with conservationists, with people in the government thinking about sustainability, thinking about how we can preserve nature and the planet, and it's very conservation focused. And then there's folks like me who work with architects and engineers, as I say, thinking about how to make the built environment more humane for people. And as I say, we do this by working with governments and private agencies and nonprofit partners. And we think about energy efficiency. There's a lot of folks studying conservation psychology as well, thinking about, pro-environmental behaviors and how we think about the planet and when we are eco-conscious, but we don't act that way, and why is that, and so on. And there's a lot of up and coming research about climate anxiety too, about climate change. And so we will study those things as psychologists, and a lot of times the research about climate anxiety will coalesce with clinical work and so on. But we do this, I think, in a maybe sometimes a bit more of an applied way than a clinical psychologist would, in that we do work with people who design the interiors of hospitals or airports, as I say, or schools or workplaces, office buildings, public spaces, to align what people really do in settings with how they should be designed and how they will be designed in the future. So, for example, my research I often work with lighting engineers, with people studying sound and noise and acoustics in places. I work with people dealing with HVAC systems and thermal comfort, air quality. And the best thing I do is work with people who are really curious about how we feel about places, what those places mean to us, what kinds of emotions places allow us to have, and whether those emotions affect our attention restoration and stress reduction, and this idea of sense of place, which I'll explain more in a minute. But that, in a nutshell, is what environmental psychology is as a field, as a discipline. And so, yeah, if you haven't heard of it before, that's okay. A lot of psychologists who take full degrees in psychology haven't heard of what environmental psych is. But it's definitely out there, and it's becoming more and more popular and more relevant all the time. Oh, let's see if I can move there we go. So, I mean, I think I've probably made the argument already, but I'll make it more strongly here in terms of why environmental psych is so important to consider. And you can probably feel this already instantly in your own life. And that's why I always say that environmental psych is such a relatable discipline, or a relatable field to study and think about. Because the second someone learns that it's formally, philosophically, empirically good to study how places affect people and how people affect places, they kind of nod their head and smile and say, yeah, of course, it makes so much sense to study these things, because the built environment and the natural environment affect your psyche. They affect your mental life. Not only do they affect your physical life, and how you get around and how easy that is, and how well you can breathe, and whether or not you have shelter from the rain and all these things. Of course, the physical built environment will affect all those things, but they also change the way you feel and your quality of life. You know that there are some places in your life where you felt really supported and inspired, and you think, yeah, I can meet my goals. I really love this. Maybe it's a library or a room in your house, or a public building somewhere in your favorite city or in your community. And you think, yeah, when I go to that place, I feel like my best self, or I can get my goals done, or I feel really inspired for the next day. I feel really enthusiastic or motivated to do what I'm going to do. But then you might have in your life experiences of places where you think, wow, I really didn't like that place, that setting. Something about that environment was just not conducive to me feeling well, or meeting my goals. And so it's instinctive to think that places can affect our attention and our mood and our well-being. And I'll go over these a little bit because there's so much research that myself and my colleagues for the last few decades have been doing to try to figure out, well, what attributes make places good? What common attributes make places feel generally good for most people most of the time? And I'm going to mention, of course, in a few slides that this is really tough to do. There's a lot of individual differences and it's very subjective. What makes me feel good in a place is not necessarily going to be the same stuff that makes you feel good in a place. But in general, we found a few commonalities. And I take this list from Judith Herwagen, who was a scholar in Seattle at the University of Washington. She wrote a paper about this a number of years ago. And so if you're curious, look her up. But yeah, so she's pointing out a couple things. The first thing she points out is that places that generally make us feel good are places that give us opportunities to have spontaneous social interactions. Now, I don't want to confuse you by saying that places are only good for their social affordance. So a place feels good, it can feel good whether or not other people are there or not. It's not all about people and relationships and interaction. And people who are very introverted will know that. But it is good for us as humans to bump into someone or see a familiar face in the day, just going down to our local coffee shop or sitting in an urban plaza and watching people go by and just watching other people go by and carry out their day or have a meeting or have lunch. And people watch. And it feels really good when we have places like that in our lives that allow us to do that. And neighborhoods that are designed by urban planners really well will know that if you put benches in a particular arrangement, and or usually this is like an urban fountain or an urban hub in some way, a lot of people will go there and set their meetings there and eat lunch there and just people watch. And those are the places where people tend to say, well, I'll meet you at 1:00 and I'm going to meet you at the fountain or in the plaza or, on the city corner. And those are the places where people feel that that make a difference to their day-to-day life, or at least make a difference to their sense of place in their city. So urban planners love this type of research. But what's important to think about is the opposite side of the coin. And I bet you're thinking this too in your own life, maybe if it's your house or a hospital setting or a community where you can't just socialize all the time. It might feel good for a little bit, but it's not going to feel good all the time. You need a place to find privacy and some respite. And I know this sounds like common sense, but there's a lot of research to say how good it is for us when there's a dedicated place in our lives, in our home, in our schools, in our offices, where we can retreat and find ourselves some time by ourselves or with a fewer number of people to catch our breath, to reduce the amount of social interaction we have in the day, especially for those of us who are maybe very sensitive to social stimulation or easily stimulated. So when we integrate these types of quiet rooms in hospital settings for staff or for children in the kindergarten classrooms or the elementary school classrooms where there's a little alcove for them, my kids loved that when they were young, where they could go and just settle down a little bit in the middle of the day. It actually creates a much better, stable, regulatory space and setup psychologically for people, and that matters for kids and it matters for anyone at any age. So usually we find people saying, oh, I really love that house I lived in when I was 20. It was great because there was this extra space I could go to chill out. Or maybe, as I say, it's in a hospital or an office or a school. So you have to sort of think on both sides of the coin. And environmental psychologists are really good at thinking about both sides of the coin. If things are, designed to be social, they also should be designed a little bit to allow us to be a little bit more affordance for solitude. So that's a good tip. A couple other things we found in environmental psych that you might relate to is opportunities to connect to nature. So as I say, I'm the co-editor in chief of the Journal of Environmental Psych. And I would say, well, I should know the statistics, I suppose, but I would really say that maybe 40% or a little less of the number of papers we see have research to do with how people respond to nature. It's very popular these days to find out how meaningful nature is to us, but also what it does to our physiology and what it does to our mental life. And we're finding so many wonderful results to say that nature can do such wonders for us, but we have to be quite critical because not everyone is going to respond as positively as other people to do with nature, especially if they've had bad experiences with nature or they've been involved in a natural disaster or they're very worried about one and so on. And so you have to be kind of critical when you think about what nature can do for everyone in general. But there are theories to say that, and we've done experiments to say that when you're looking at nature, like a natural biophilic organic patterns and shapes, when you're looking at that, you recover faster from surgery. There's been experiments to show that. You have attention restoration. So say you've just taken a test or had something really stressful happen to you. Maybe you had an argument with your friend, or you recover from that stress quicker than some rectilinear pattern or some architectural pattern. And so nature has this effect where it will calm us down quicker and make us feel more regulated. And it will even go so far, there's some studies to say that we feel more generous when we look at nature or have nature exposure in our lives, more pro-social, and have more executive function ability. This is why you see a lot of organic patterns and architectural details and even bird song being pumped into public spaces where people are stressed, like waiting rooms and airports, just to use and take advantage of the positive effects that nature can have on us. And so I'll go into more detail about that later, but it is really important to sort of get some exposure to nature in our day. And what's great is you don't need a lot of it for it to work, but I'll talk about that more in a minute. A couple other things that environmental psych says that you might be able to take into your day-to-day life is that we need things to make spatial sense. There's a whole group of environmental psychologists who work on spatial cognition. So this wayfinding idea where people need to be able to find their way around. And when you can, you like that place better, your stress goes down, and your day is just better because you know where you're going. And so we often work with, again, urban planners, community planners, interior designers, architects to make sure that places, especially places that are stressful already, like hospitals, have really strong wayfinding signage and so on. And it doesn't always work very well. And I've always had experiences where I get lost and then get stressed. But when places are legible, our stress response goes down. And so it is helpful for environmental psychologists to help architects and designers sort of study people and see where they're getting lost and check where you should put the "You Are Here" maps and how best to make people feel safe and as though they can navigate a place and have that confidence, especially in places like, I'm just thinking about my Nana's care home before she passed. And the care home was really good at showing people where the TV room was and where the dining room was and where their rooms were, because people get lost all the time. And then they'd feel upset about it. And you want people to be confident. So they would show people where to go through signs and colors. And in general, and again, you can read about this on your own if you like, but environmental psychologists are really conscious of things like the ways in which we behave with each other in place. So boundary regulation mechanisms, we study how far apart people tend to sit in different places like libraries and on the bus, and how much space we should give in hospital rooms to different beds and so on. It's territoriality, personal space tolerance, all of these things that are sort of intra-individual to us, but also we should be considering how to design for those things in public infrastructure. So often environmental psychology comes into play for those types of projects. A bit of theory, not too much, because I don't want to get too academic in a public talk, but I do want to point out that all of these things that I've just said aren't just common sense. I mean, they sound like common sense because they really do feel a part of our lives, but there's a lot of empirical work and theory behind what we say, and we're still adjusting these theories, but most of them relate to the amount of stimulation that we get on a day-to-day basis from all the things that we shouldn't ignore in order to feel more comfort in our lives, like the amount of lighting or sound or noise in our lives and the frequency of those things and the duration and the number of sources. All of those types of stimuli can affect our mood and our ability to heal. So it's really important to pay attention to the stimulation in our environments. But then also keep in mind that we're really great as human beings in terms of how we adapt to those things. So over time, if something, if a light is really bright or if there's a different noise somewhere and at first it's annoying, oftentimes people will adapt to those things. Not that maybe it's the best thing, but often we our bodies will find a way to adapt to things like stimulation to do with noise and sound and lighting. But there are things that we just can't adapt to. They've done studies with children's reading scores and math levels in schools where there's a flight path over top of the school, for example. And reading scores and math scores are continually worse for kids who are being interrupted by aircraft noise. It's not the same if a train's going by. We actually can adapt really well to certain sounds that are of a particular frequency. But planes, for example, are really tough, especially when it's shaking the classroom and no one can focus. But if you move those children to a classroom on another area of the school where the flight path isn't so noticeable, then they'll improve. So we can adapt. There are people, there are environmental psychologists that use their whole career to study what happens to people when they're overstimulated all the time. Overload theorists, we'll call them. And they'll study when there's just too much lighting in a person's life, or to disrupt their sleep or their cognition or their emotional regulation. What happens when what happens when there's too little stimulation in someone's life. The other thing that environmental psychologists use in terms of theory that you might think about is the idea of control. And it's a really important facet to a lot of the theories that we use in environmental psych. Whether or not you have control over, like I'm saying, the lighting or how hot it is in your room or how cold you are or how many layers you've got on or what the noises are around you, if you don't have control over those things are going to feel even more upsetting and effective of your well-being and your state of mind than if you do have control over them. So perceived control and actual control are some of the facets that we study as academics all the time to just try to make, as I say at the beginning, to try to make as many environments as we can more humane for people so that we offer control to a number of different groups and individuals, even if this is, their home or a hospital room or even, a place like an airport where you can't control the lighting, you can't control the humidity or the HVAC or the reverb from the construction that they're doing. And it adds to the stress because you can't control those elements. And so there are sometimes ways that you can design to make sure that people do feel more in control. And that's usually when they ask an environmental psychologist to help. Another theory that we do, and I won't go into it in too much detail, but it's not so much studying individual differences. There will be people, environmental psychologists, that study what a lot of people tend to do most of the time, depending on the design. So how if you go into a classroom, for example, and all of the desks are set up to face the front and it's clear, it's obvious what you're supposed to do if you're a student or the teacher. You come in and you look at the design and you go, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do here because the desks are facing this way. So I must sit down and put my stuff and I'm supposed to look at the teacher and learn. And if you're the teacher, well, the desks are all facing the front of the room and the projector's there, so I must go to the front of the room and teach. And the design helps you know what you're supposed to be doing. And that's called the program of the design. And it works well when there's a special number of people. So if you're in a classroom and it's sort of designed for 30 people, but say 100 people came in the classroom, that program, the design of it would fall apart. People would be sitting cross-legged on the floor. They'd be sitting at the back of the room, standing against the wall, looking at the teacher. No one would be comfortable, and it would all go against what the original design was meant to be. And the same as if a classroom is built for 30 people, but 2 people show up, then you can sit wherever. Maybe you lay down or, you sit where you normally wouldn't, maybe right at the front of the class, because otherwise it feels awkward for the teacher if there's someone at the back of the class and there's only 2 people. So the program of different places, and it could be even, your local coffee shop, when you go and you line up and you realize that somebody's lined up in the wrong way and you think, oh, they're not a local. They don't know how to line up, because you know where to line up and it should be clear where to do that. Anyway, I think it's neat to study these things. It's sort of a mixture between social psychology and design and architecture. But if you do it right, it ends up making daily life so much better for a lot of people. Okay, as promised, I said I'd talk a bit about nature. So even for a few minutes a day, nature can reduce stress and improve attention and support emotional well-being, but it doesn't, I mean, I'm showing a forest, which is sort of ironic. It doesn't have to be a forest. It doesn't have to be this big wilderness outing. It can be a local park. It can be a potted plant. It could be a piece of art that depicts nature and natural organic shapes and patterns, or it could be on TV. I love to watch those channels where they show nature scenes on the go. They rotate through and they have the nature sounds, and they might show some information about the national parks or wherever it is. And even that can be a calming influence on our day-to-day life. And so now, another part of my education is applied neuroscience. And there's this whole other field called environmental neuroscience, where we watch what the brain does when we expose people to different types of nature, say. And we see what connections and what parts of the brain are active when we look at different aspects of nature. And we can see that the brain is still doing good things, even if you have 5 minutes of nature exposure, even if it's art, even if it's simulated in a virtual reality headset. There's something about nature that helps us feel better. And that's another area of study. People will try to figure it out. What is it about nature? Is it the color? Is it the fractals? Is it the patterns? And so a lot of people are doing research on that. So don't worry if you feel like you can't go out into these great big nature walks to get this nature exposure to help you feel better, because it doesn't necessarily have to be an ordeal to do it. It could be just the street trees down your local community walk, or adding indoor plants, or listening to birds, or water sounds is another one that the brain likes. Often images of nature make us feel even better when there's a movement of water in the scene. And I think the more and more we do research on these things, and especially with virtual reality, it can open up a number of different ways that we can get into nature if we feel like we can't. I mean, I certainly can't go for a hike every day, and not everyone can. And it may not always be forests either. There's been lots of research about mountains and savanna, desert experiences, and so on. So it can't be just green, and the blue spaces matter, the ocean matters. And so it's also related to what means something to the person, to the individual. If someone has a strong association to the desert will do better for them than going into the forest will for their mood and their well-being as well. So it's about knowing yourself as much as getting out into nature just for the prescriptive reason of feeling good. It's about doing it with meaning. As I say, speaking of individual differences, yeah, I mean, of course we differ. We all differ in our culture, in our genetics, our lifestyle, our mental habits, our expectations, our behaviors. So it's natural that our environmental preferences will vary, and they change. What I liked when I was 5 is not the same as what I liked now. I grew up in the prairies, and now I live by the ocean, and I appreciate lots of things in between. I moved around a lot when I was young and took a lot of preferences away from all the places that I lived. So each person will appraise their environment in different ways at different times. It can even change based on your health. So what I liked, maybe before I became a mother, or before I had a particular illness or whatever, might be different than after those things, say, or how old you are, or whether or not you're in a good mood or a bad mood, or whether or not you're too hot, or you're fitter before a certain point in your life than you are now, or something. Your preferences will change based on who you are. And so you have to allow for those things when you choose to spend time in nature, or other areas in your community, and different architectural preferences as well. So the point is, I guess, is that the physical spaces that we choose to spend our time in, not just the social aspects, like it's not just who's with you, it's always also what is around you. And those spaces really matter for our stress and our well-being and our quality of life and our attention and our memory and our emotions. And so it's not surprising. I was just thinking about, folks who've had a brain injury, and my mom, like, after her stroke, a lot of things that she would have found calming are no longer calming. She finds them to be maybe confusing or more overwhelming than before, and she's had to adjust her expectations and adjust. We've all had to sort of change what types of exposure to environments that she gets to be placed in, for her own quality of life. So it's just nice to remember that environments matter when you're making decisions about what you're gonna do in the day. And it also matters too what kinds of emotional bonds you've been able to form to different places, not just people, but places as well. That meaning making and general well-being go together really strongly, and I'll explain that in a second. You may have heard about this idea of sense of place, and we sort of say it, but when I say it, it might mean something different than what when other people say it. Because when I say sense of place, I think about the academic sort of dry empirical model, the statistical model of what's inside this term. But I think it's a really helpful model, so I'll tell you about it. Sense of place for environmental psychologists tends to mean a mixture of place attachment. So I'll tell you more about that in detail, but basically it's the emotional bond we have with places. Place identity. So this idea that you are who you are because of a place, or you're in your best self in a particular place, or a place helped make you you. And then place dependence, which is more of a behavioral compatibility with the place. And when sense of place is strong, a whole bunch of other positive things happen in our lives. It's just a matter of finding out what types of places are going to help sense of place occur, and how we can maintain it once it does, once it's developed. So place attachment, again, it's not hard to imagine being attached to a place. Although I should say that there are people who I've come across in my research and in my life that say, nope, I don't attach to places. I don't care about the place. All that matters to me is, say, the who I'm with, or my health, or myself, or whatever. And that's natural. That's okay. But a lot of people do attach to a place, and what's interesting is that some people attach to places they don't even like. So it might not be the most beautiful thing, or you may have had a trauma there, or it may be associated to something negative or risky, or it may be associated with, the most beautiful times in your life, or the best parts of your life. It's sort of up to a person and how they bond, and when and why they bond. But often the places that we do bond to, um, go beyond this sort of sense of preference or judgment. Like I say, it might be the ugliest thing, the ugliest room, or it's not very beautiful part of the park or whatever, but for some reason you've bonded to it. And understanding that bonding is a wonderful psychological exercise for well-being. I mean, I have so many journals of me writing out my feelings toward all of the different places I've come across, because as I say, I've lived in a lot of places. And I love to explore why it is I bonded to that place. And oddly, I won't even know that I have until I've left, or until there's been some loss, and I've had to move away from that place, or I've been, yeah, it's no longer available to me or something. And I've had to write through, almost like a therapy exercise, about why that place loss has mattered to me emotionally. And why this is so cool is that when we understand how we've bonded to a place, we can work to keep it if it's possible, or bring in the things that we bonded about in other places to help us feel more comfortable. And they've done studies in kids where the children who have place attachment, so they have some place in their life that they've bonded to, that they really love, they would miss it so much if they couldn't have it anymore. The kids that have a strong sense of place tend to improve in self-regulatory processes. They have different memory capabilities. Often their cognitive restoration after stress is better. So the hypothesis, the idea is that when your place attachment is strong and you've been able to form some, then it's almost the same as having secure attachment to a person. And we learn about this in psychology a lot, where you have a lot of good things in your psyche when you're able to attach strongly and securely and comfortably to a person in your life. And when that attachment is there, then you can self-reflect, you can feel safe, you might be better at problem solving. There's some experiments that show that. And your stress management is better because you feel like you've got a secure attachment in your life. But it's not just with people. It can happen with places, which means that you can go around thinking about all the places that you might be able to bond to that will give you psychological resilience and strength. I think if it's an important part of human psychosocial well-being, then we should try to research it more and figure out for ourselves what our healthy attachments are to people and places alike. So I love talking about place attachment. But I also love talking about place identity because it's another piece of the sense of place puzzle. So place identity isn't as emotional as place attachment is. It's more about the self and your growth as a person. So, for example, I wasn't who I am now until I went to the University of Victoria for my bachelor's degree, you know, over 20 years ago. That university and that landscape and the trees and the buildings and the habits that I had there, that place made me who I am now. I wasn't me really until that place entered my life. And I ended up doing one of my master's degrees and my PhD at that university. And I met my husband there. I got married there. I had my babies there. We lived there in the family housing there while I was doing my graduate studies. So a lot of my life was at this university. And I really root a lot of my identity in that place. And you might have a place in your life where you think, yeah, I really wasn't myself until I was spending time in that place, or I was able to understand myself better in a particular place. And it's not quite the same as attachment, although they do go together a lot. I mean, you can imagine that you would bond to a place maybe that shaped your identity. And there have been, a lot of studies to do with the negative side of this, where your identity might change for the worse in a particular place, and you can explore that too. And as I say, writing that out in a journal as a therapeutic exercise is a wonderful idea. And then place dependence is, as I say, it's more behavioral. So it's very tough to imagine that you're going to feel a quality of life if you're in a place where you can't get what you want done. So urban planners love studies on place dependence because they want to know why people move away. And if they study all the people in a particular community, and maybe all of them need a bank and a coffee shop and a grocery store and a bus stop and a yoga studio and sidewalks that are wide enough to push a double stroller down, say, all of those things, if people who are living there are saying, yeah, this is our walkable lifestyle that we'd like, and we'd like to have things accessible, but this neighborhood doesn't have that, so we're going to move away. The urban planners go, oh no, okay, we're gonna make things more accessible and put in more bus stops and zone it so that there can be grocery stores and banks and yoga studios for people to stay there and maybe age in place, or have other public health outcomes that urban planners are curious about and care about. So all of these things come from environmental psychology theory and research, but certainly they're found in other fields, but we're all doing the same thing. We're just maybe not talking about it in the same language. So it's good to think about it in lots of different ways. I will talk about the benefits of sense of place just quickly. It can be really helpful to think about sense of place in your mental health. Take advantage of it, because if you can find the places that you formed sense of place, you can sort of make it so that you can keep it once you've got it, and think about what helped you shape that. What is it about that environment that's supportive and makes you feel like yourself, or makes you feel more in control and connected to the people around you? So you just ask, where do I feel most like me? Or what places feel safe and calming to me, and why? And then hopefully try to build your routines around that. I just looked at my watch, so I'm just going to go a bit quicker through this list. I didn't know who would be in the audience, so I just threw out some ideas about stimulation in case you're curious about what to do, maybe at home or wherever you're living or spending your time. Just think about stimulation overload and how to get that down. But in the same way, people say, oh, declutter. But what if those things that you're told to declutter are really meaningful to you? It shouldn't be an either or. Surround yourself with things that are meaningful to you, but keep it low stimulation if you need to. Same with electronic, social noise, and so on. That auditory stimulation in our environment can matter to us a lot. And if you can't control it, then it becomes more of a stressor than a benefit. So if you can limit those things, always improve wayfinding if you can. If you find yourself, losing your way somewhere where you're living, maybe put up a sign or ask someone to put up a sign. these things are common sense, but sometimes knowing that there's lots of research behind it makes you feel more confident in doing it. I always say create a dedicated calm zone. In my house, there's always particular areas where me and my kids and my husband go if we want to calm down. It's really great if this is a part of your living situation where if it's just a specific chair or a corner or part of a room where you go only to rest and relax, and just reflect. Maybe that's where you write in your journal or look out the window or listen to the birds or look at photographs of people who mean something of you or to you. It can be really helpful. And again, the lighting, I always bring back the lighting because it's so important. Lamp lighting, task lighting, warm lighting, it makes a difference because the stimulation in our environment makes such a difference to our mood. I won't go over all these books because of the time, but just trust me, there's so much out there about environmental psych. And because this is recorded, you can look at it again if you want to take down the titles of these books and look at them on the internet. Some of them definitely all of them you can get from the local library. So that's something. And there's a lot of journals and, as I say, open access articles that you can read. So I'll just close off because I want to have you ask questions if you want, but I just wanted to say thank you. And I hope you've been inspired to think about the environment and the settings all around you and how it can affect your attitudes and your intentions and your behaviors and your emotions in public spaces and private spaces, in natural green, blue spaces and built spaces alike. So you can each develop a sense of place, keep that sense of place, and think about how you connect emotionally to lots of different areas in your life, because the environment matters so much to our mental life. And I think that's the whole point of the talk, to make sure that everyone remembers that. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, good.
I have one question myself, so um, maybe I'll ask first. How's that?
Sure.
I was curious if um, the level of engagement that somebody has with their environment can or how that affects place attachment.
Oh yeah, the word engagement is fun because it's such a what does it mean? Like when I think about engagement, I'm not even sure if I know to what extent that means. But I think to me, if I'm engaged in something, I can't, I mean, I'm more deeply engaged if I have an emotional connection and a sense of place to that area. If I really care about that area, we've done research where people become engaged in like a neighborhood advisory group or a community group, and all of a sudden that care and concern trickles down, and now they're picking up litter in the neighborhood, and they've got clubs going on, and they're going to more things because it introduces that care in all sorts of other behavioral ways. But
Hmm.
I wonder if it starts with engagement and then becomes sense of place, or does it start with sense of place and then become engagement? And so these are the circular models that we statistically test in a lot of the studies, where it's like, what's the first step? Because when you're giving advice, practical advice to members of government or the public sector, decision makers, to say, how do we get the public more engaged? If it starts with sense of place, then there's no point in ignoring that. But if it starts with engagement, then you can say, well, do engagement and then get sense of place as a bonus. But without having direct evidence, I can't say, but I can imagine that they go together. And
Yeah.
I think it would be really helpful to do a study on what engagement really means. What does
Yeah,
the word
that's
mean?
fair.
How
No, that's
deep does
fair.
it go?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's a great question.
Very cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and
Yeah. If anyone wants to email me too, like they can absolutely email me at VIU because I can write answers to questions too.
okay, great. And what was the email if they wanted to reach you?
Oh, it's just lindsay.mccunn at viu.ca.
Okay,
But
sounds
yeah,
good. I'll
Hello,
add that into the video after the fact here.
totally.
hi Lindsay, it's Jeffrey. I'm with Emily and Susan. I'm just wondering
Hi.
what you think in terms of the benefits of doing photography out in nature for people with brain injuries.
Wonderful. Yeah. I think photography and any kind of art or any kind of way to have that feedback where you're exposed to nature, you're looking at it, you're being stimulated by it, but if you're taking a photograph of it, you're choosing that angle and, the lighting and the way that it communicates something. And all of a sudden that meaning then happens and works in that moment, but then it works for many moments afterward because you've got the picture. So, and it's also this sort of sense of ownership's the wrong word because I don't know, I don't feel that, but it's almost like um, you've taken something from nature and kept it for yourself in a meaningful way, and you can show others and sort of use it as a legacy of your interaction with that place at the same time, and maybe go back further. So I think it, I mean, again, without empirical evidence, I can't say for sure, but I can imagine that interacting with it, and again, the word engagement, like that would be a great way to engage with nature, not just sit on a bench. Not that it's bad to sit on a bench and listen to nature and be immersed in it, because that can do wonders for you. But I like this idea of taking a photo of it, because then there's just that one extra step further into the area that you're in. And maybe it'll just make you remember it in different ways or feel creative in different ways. I like to do art, and I mean, I sketch something really quick and then bring it home and paint it. I know a lot of my friends will actually paint big elaborate paintings in situ. So they'll stay in nature and paint outside, and be cold, and the painting's almost ruined by the time they get home if it's raining or something. But they actually take the commitment to do that. But any kind of engagement like that, I think, will do something to help the connection. And all you're doing, I think, is just forming more memories and more meaning. And usually that's a good thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I was also curious, are you or any of your colleagues involved with the planning for the new Woodgrove Centre and the big plan going on up there?
No, no one asked me. I should have been involved. No, I think it's hard. I think I'm the only environmental psychologist here in the city. I have been involved in some city work before. I've worked with the city a number of times. I wish they'd asked me. I would have loved to be involved. I guess I could have put myself in there. I know I love those types of things because there's so much opinion, and it becomes hard because you want to do the best for everyone, but there's always going to be people who say, well, wait a minute, for my situation, for my circumstances, I would really like this and not that, and so on. I don't envy the decision makers, I suppose, but it is public money, so it's important to ask questions and get your feelings and your words into the decision-making process, I suppose. I am involved with I've done a pre-design and post-design at the new correctional center in Nanaimo now. So I'm just writing the report for the post-occupancy evaluation. But it wasn't with the inmates, it was actually with the staff. And I've done the same thing with the new couch in district hospital. So I'm just waiting to do the post-occupancy evaluation with the staff at that hospital about how the design makes them feel at work. It's a bit more sophisticated than that. I hope it's a big survey, a big open-ended part of that survey as well. It's mixed methods. But those are two projects that I've worked on recently with local government and Island Health and organizations, where we're doing this sort of pre-design questionnaire to ask how people feel about a place and what they don't want to lose in a new setting, and then ask them after the new place has been operational for a while, and see if it worked, if the design worked, and if not, how we can fix it.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Really appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise. And yeah, I will make a recording of this and have it up on YouTube to share long term with the rest of our clients.
Great. Well, thank you very much again for having me.